Chapter 5. Back to School. Stepping onto platform 9 3/4 at King's Cross the following morning was hardly commonplace for the Muggle pair, but at least they had the confidence to rush the barrier when prompted by Harry. The swirling steam and bittersweet smell of coal being burnt were like a warm embrace of nostalgia. They smiled at each other. Ron and Hermione were waiting for them by the open door of the Soul carriage. They were chatting with the train's guard. "It's only your group today, sir," the guard said to Harry. "I can make you all a light brunch and some tea, if that's to your taste." "Thanks, Edgar. That's kind of you," said Harry over his shoulder as they stepped aboard. "My pleasure, sir," Edgar beamed. "I'll give you all a moment to get settled, then we'll be off." They made their way into one of the compartments to the side of the corridor. They placed their few items of luggage into the netted racks overhead and arranged themselves on the 2 rows of seats which faced each other. "It's like going back to school, but without all the problems we had then," Hermione enthused. "Probably because that's exactly what we are doing," Ron pointed out, receiving a frustrated scowl from his wife for his trouble. "You know what I mean, Ron Weasley," she scolded. "Strangely enough, I do appear to have brought a chocolate frog for everyone," Ron announced. Hermione hugged his arm and gave him a peck on the cheek. "You're not as bad as some people say, are you?" "Well, it's mostly you that says I am," he pointed out, but we'll let that slide. "You said they had to make Hogwarts again after the war," said Lydia. "Is it a lot different now?" Harry gave a quick chuckle. "We're not great ones for making changes for change's sake in the wizarding world. Hogwarts is almost exactly as it was when we were students." "Have you revisited your alma mater frequently?" Ambrose asked them. "Sorry?" said Ron. "Have we been back to Hogwarts much, Ron?" Hermione tutted. "I've been back pretty regularly," said Harry. "They asked me back to give talks on the war and classes on defence against the dark arts." "I've been back quite a few times too recently," Hermione added. "The library at the school has some rare and wonderful books." "I used to go back, but I got banned by McGonagall when she was still head teacher there," Ron admitted. Ambrose laughed. "How did you achieve such censure?" "After I left school, I worked with George, my brother, at Weasley's Wizard Wheezes," Ron explained. "We make jokes and tricks, so a lot of our customers are at Hogwarts most of the year. We used to take it in turns to give talks on what we did in the war, but really to sell a lot of products. McGonagall, the head, didn't appreciate it and sort of requested that we never darken her doors again, without some better reason. As though there's a better reason than to spread a bit of happiness." "I think it was actually the flea powder, Ron," Hermione corrected. "Flea powder?" Lydia asked. "Flea powder was a way of getting away from your enemies," Ron explained. "Fleeing from them, you see." "And the teachers were less than impressed with their students being able to escape them, presumably?" Ambrose asked. They weren't fans, no," Ron confirmed. "Professor McGonagall said it was utterly destroying discipline, an absolute disaster." Hermione shook her head. "Bit of an exaggeration, given the war and everything," said Harry, "but she wasn't happy." "Who are we going to Hogwarts to see?" Lydia inquired. "Draco, did you say?" "Draco Malfoy. He's a defence against the dark arts professor and an old school friend," Harry explained. "Huh," Ron interjected. "We're calling him a friend now, are we?" "Yes, Ron, we are," Hermione insisted. Ambrose interrupted. "Was there not a Malfoy who was one of your antagonists during the war?" "Several," Harry nodded. "He was the one we were at school with. He tried to kill Harry," Ron scowled, "and Dumbledore, and he also saved my life," Harry pointed out. "And you saved his," Ron countered. "And his mother saved my life too." "That was all in the war. It's in the past," Hermione said. "He's turned his life around and he's a good person now." "Is he?" Ron queried. "How do we know for sure?" "Look, Ron, we know you're not a fan of Draco's," Harry said. "But Draco has a lot of knowledge of the dark arts and a huge collection of artefacts. He's doing a lot of good passing his knowledge on. and he's our best bet for finding out more about the old magic. There are our other friends to see as well. Hermione moved the conversation to a less contentious topic. There's Neville, who's a herbology professor, and Hagrid, the groundkeeper. He's the giant Harry told us about, isn't he? Lydia chirruped. Half giant, to be correct, but he's quite large, Hermione admitted. And then there's the new head teacher, Kelly Lee. She's unusual for a head of Hogwarts, Harry mused. How so, Harry? Ambrose asked. She's young, in her 30s, Harry explained, which seems weird after Dumbledore and McGonagall. And then she's American and just a bit American. You know, enthusiastic, confident, impeccably groomed. And she's so capable. I was wary of her when she first got the job. But as you get used to her, she's fine. Impressive, really. The students seem pretty fond of her. What do you think of her, Hermione? Like you, I wasn't taken with her at first, and I'm still not completely sure, she replied. I don't know why. She hasn't changed any of the subjects or how they taught, and the professors are happy with her. Hermione frowned. But there is something, I think. She's rather taken with Harry, I've noticed. I wouldn't say that, Harry protested. You certainly wouldn't in front of Ginny, Ron laughed. We've learned to get along together, Harry attempted to explain. And we enjoy each other's company. Actually, I think she accompanies me around the school to keep an eye on me. Both eyes, probably, Ron smirked. At that point, Edgar, the guard, returned with a trolley carrying their brunch. Possibly small feast would have been a more accurate description. They tucked in, serving themselves from a number of beautifully kept tureens. It wasn't clear whether the tureens were silver, but they were polished so brightly that they might as well have been. They contained everything any of them, even Ron, could possibly want. Ambrose and Lydia could not get over the fact that, on returning to tureens they were sure they had raided before, they found yet other different foods to tempt them. Eventually they were all sitting back, so full they were unable to lean forward for more. Within moments, Edgar returned to clear away the tureens' cutlery and plates. They greeted him with profuse thanks and praise for the meal. I can't imagine we will need to eat again for quite some time, Edgar, Harry told him. Even Ron's full. Edgar smiled. Glad to be of service to you all. Hope you have a pleasant visit to Hogwarts. He took his leave and glided down the corridor with his trolley. As they travelled onward, the conversation turned to the buildings of Hogwarts and how they'd been restored after the battle against Voldemort and his Death Eaters. In general, most of the castle had been returned to its pre-war state. A few things had changed, though. The Chamber of Secrets had, as far as anyone could ascertain, been removed. This comment meant the story of the chamber had to be related to the Muggle guests. As always, Harry tried to downplay his bravery, but this time Hermione and Ron were present, and having none of it. So, is that how you and Ginny fell in love? Lydia demanded to know. Ginny was already in love with Harry, Ron pointed out, but she grew out of it, thankfully. Harry snared her again later on, he joked. There's so much to learn, Lydia chirped. About your world, the wizarding world. I love it. Hermione spent a while answering Lydia's limitless questions, while their male companions rested their brunch-filled bellies. Ron finally passed around his chocolate frogs, once he judged they might have room to fit them in. Lydia was suitably astonished that the chocolate novelty seemed alive. She was conflicted between wanting the chocolate, but being completely unable to countenance eating what appeared to be a living creature. Ambrose visibly steeled his nerves and bit off his frog's head. As soon as he had, he showed it to Lydia. It was chocolate. Lydia was still unable to bite hers. Ron assured her that if she left it out of its wrapping for a while, the magic animation would stop, and it would simply be a frog-shaped bar of chocolate. Within a minute or so, his prediction proved true, and the bar was duly consumed by a delighted Lydia. They talked some more about Hogwarts and Hogsmeade Village. They spoke of lighter things and better times, the times in their school days when they'd been able to enjoy their life, their school, and their visits to the village. Lydia sat in rapt attention, soaking up the atmosphere of it all. Ambrose looked at her from time to time and smiled. Eventually, the train began to slow on its approach to Hogsmeade Station. It was getting into the early evening, but still bright and warm, it being nearly summer. "It's quite different for me arriving at Hogwarts these days," Harry explained. "When I was at school, the only time I arrived by train was in the Septembers, at the start of the school year. At that time of year, it'd be getting dark now. The other terms, I stayed at school during the holidays, so I wasn't arriving back by train like the others. It's earlier in the year, and I think the train is faster with one carriage, so it's actually still daylight." They gathered their belongings and made their way from the compartment into the corridor. By the time they reached the door of the carriage, the train was stopping with the last sigh of steam. Edgar the guard helped the ladies alight onto the platform, and the boys followed. Hogsmeade Station was small and traditional, and had probably changed little since Victorian times, apart from a regular coat of fresh paint, it appeared. The guard hailed a few Hogsmeade villagers passing by as he made his way back to the guard's van. "Here's our welcoming committee," Harry laughed, and pointed at the far end of the platform. Emerging from a cloud of steam was the silhouette of a huge lumbering figure, seeming twice as tall as an ordinary man. His mane of hair and voluminous beard were grizzled and streaked with white. Set amongst that furry mass was a broad, grinning face with apple-red cheeks. "Hagrid!" Hermione squealed and ran towards him like a schoolgirl. Harry and Ron were grinning and urged the rest of the group forwards to meet their friend. "Wow!" Lydia breathed, her mouth failing to close at the end of the exclamation. "Rubeus Hagrid," Ambrose noted, with a slow nod, recalling the name from the tales the others had told them. "He is indeed rather large." As the Muggle pair approached, their hosts were crowded around the gargantuan gamekeeper. They were all laughing, and Hagrid was clapping the two boys on the shoulders. This tended to put an end to the laughter, and the two tough Aurors stepped back, grimacing slightly and flexing their now aching bodies. Harry introduced their guests to Hagrid. "Ooh, Muggles, eh?" he observed. "Well, any friend of Harry, Hermione and Ron is a friend of mine." He knelt down to shake hands with Lydia, and for a moment looked as though he was going to slap Ambrose's back in greeting. He clearly thought better of it and shook hands instead. Ambrose's suddenly taut expression relaxed visibly. "Well, come along, all of you," he urged them. "I brung me down me sherry boom to give you a lift up to the school." "Sharabang?" Ambrose suggested. "Aye, that would be the word," Hagrid agreed with a nod as they moved down the platform to the station gates. "Oh," exclaimed Lydia, sounding disappointed. As they had rounded the corner at the end of the station buildings, the castle of Hogwarts had been revealed to them. To Lydia, it was a dark ruin with a few towers still standing. It squatted on a mountainside across the loch from where they stood. The whole group stood for a few moments to take in the view, but nobody spoke. Behind them, the steam engine panted laboriously, like an exhausted beast of burden. "Here we are," Hagrid bellowed. They all turned to face him. He was standing by something which resembled a summer house or perhaps a short row of beach huts. It was painted a number of colours, mostly bright. Red and yellow figured prominently amongst them. Looking down, they saw that it teetered on a set of what appeared to be cartwheels with rubber tyres. The spokes and rims of the wheels had not escaped the attention of the garish paintbrush. Hagrid strode up to the contraption and patted its brass-framed grille. The grille was a small work of classical architecture, common to vehicles of a certain age. It was flanked by a mist-matched set of headlamps, one relatively modern with a bulb, and the other resembling a mutated hurricane lamp. "Bought it off a bloke," Hagrid began. Down the pub, Harry and Ron finished together, before breaking down into fits of laughter. "Yeah," Hagrid confirmed, his smile dropping slightly. "Oh, Hagrid," Hermione soothed. "Ignore them. It's sweet." Ambrose stepped forward, his face beaming. "That, sir, is a thing of great beauty. I think Shariboom is a much more appropriate name for it. No Sharabang has ever been so splendid, unless it belonged to a great Maharaja. Hagrid beamed with pride, and stooped down in front of the radiator grill. He produced a starting handle from a pocket somewhere in the uncharted depths of his voluminous coat. Inserting the end of the handle into a small hole under the grill, he swung it once, and the engine clattered and chugged into life. One by one, they climbed up into the unusual conveyance. It sank noticeably on its suspension as Hagrid stepped into the driver's seat. The upholstery inside was of a deep plum-coloured leather, which was old and cracked. At the worn corners, the leather was on the edge of turning to dust. The walls were covered with a fading and peeling wallpaper, patterned with green bamboo plants. Overhead hung swags of faded pink silk. "Well, this is interesting," Hermione ventured, taking in the decor. "My grandmother had a handbag in much the same style," Ambrose observed. "My Aunt Muriel had a whole house in this style," Ron exclaimed. With a jerk, the Shariboom started to move off. "You'll be able to see Hogwarts proper once we get round this next corner," Hagrid called back to them as the carriage swayed along the road. Lydia made a less than enthusiastic grunt. They had come to the corner, and on the mountainside she saw a broken-down pile of stones, with a few arches and walls still standing. Harry and Ron suddenly burst into laughter. "Ignore them," Hermione tutted. "The big joke is that because you are non-magical people—" "We don't mind being called muggles," Lydia chirped. "We know you'd never be insulting, Hermione, don't we, Uncle?" "Of course," Ambrose confirmed with a warm smile. "Well, okay," Hermione continued. "Muggles see a dismal ruin because of the protective charms. You probably don't feel as though you want to go there. That's another protection. You should be able to see it in all its glory once we're inside the grounds, though." The Shariboom rattled and rolled uphill for some time. They took in the scenery across the loch and to the mountains beyond. At last they pulled up to a pair of large iron gates, flanked by stone pillars topped with carved figures. The figures appeared to be wild boars, except that they clearly had wings. Lydia turned to Harry. "The Hogs of Hogwarts," he explained, seeing her frown. "Oh," she remarked. "Do magical boars have wings?" "I suppose so," Harry mused. "I can't say I've ever seen any. You'd have to ask Luna." "Luna?" Ambrose raised an eyebrow. "Yes, you remember. I mentioned her. She was a member of Dumbledore's army. She's a respected magical zoologist now," Harry explained. "She married the grandson of Newt Scamander, who wrote our magical creatures textbooks. He's a magi-zoologist too." They started to clamber down from the vehicle. "I hope she never lost her uniqueness," Ambrose mused. "Miss Luna, that is." "Oh no," Harry confirmed. "She's still barking mad," Ron finished. "Right, well, I'm sorry about this," Hagrid told them. "For some reason, the head teacher don't like me bringing old Shari onto the grounds. I have to leave her here." "She won't get stolen, will she?" Lydia fretted. "Nah, bless you," Hagrid chuckled. "They're as charmed so that muggles won't see her parked up. And wizards, well, they don't seem to be interested. Prefer brooms, I suppose." "It's a bit big for most people as well," Lydia pointed out. "Yeah, that'd be it," Hagrid nodded, his beard bobbing up and down. Moments later, they stood before the gates. "Harry Potter, on official ministry business," Harry enunciated clearly. Nothing happened for a few seconds. Lydia noticed a flash of something pink, and turned to look at Hagrid. The Shariboom was nowhere to be seen, and Hagrid was tucking a small pink umbrella into his huge coat. There came a clang and a high ping from the gates. They swung open. The group of friends stepped through and strode purposefully along the drive. Lydia had to do a kind of skip every couple of steps to keep up. They rounded a corner by a stand of trees, and the castle came into view. "Oh, my stars!" Lydia gasped. She could now see the castle in its full glory. No longer did it appear to be a small, dark, shabby ruin, but was a huge, imposing forest of towers and windows, a confection of arches and steps, stone, glass, tiles, and magic, all in one. At length they approached the broad steps, which rose up to the front doors. A figure emerged and hailed them. "Hi, Harry. Hi, everyone." "Neville!" Harry, Ron, and Hermione chorused. The tall, muscular figure strode down towards them, his arms raised in greeting. "Hey, Professor Longbottom to you," he grinned as he reached them, and began to hug and slap them in turn. The four old friends laughed together. "Who are your friends?" Neville asked. Lydia and Ambrose stepped forward and were introduced. Neville greeted them and nodded to Hagrid as the gamekeeper excused himself and left them, walking back out into the grounds and towards his hut, which he had pointed out on the walk up to the castle. They mounted the steps and walked into the entrance hall. The Muggle guests stared around, looking up to the ceiling high above them and ahead to the impressive marble staircase. "Dinner's just started, if you want something to eat," Neville asked. "Or we can eat the broomsticks later." "I think we'd better announce ourselves to the head teacher. Is she in the hall?" said Harry. "Eating in her office tonight. Probably waiting to greet you, now I come to think of it. I'll come with you." He led them to one side, down a ground-floor corridor. "Does she ever use McGonagall's office?" Ron asked. "She says she prefers to be where people can pop in any time. American, you see," Neville explained. "What do you think of her?" Ron wanted to know. "She's fine," Neville nodded. "Doesn't mind me doing experiments in the greenhouses." "Neville's a herbology professor," Harry explained to the guests, forgetting that he had already told them this. He turned to Neville and asked, "How did your purple shouting broccoli turn out, Neville?" Neville pulled a face. "Not so good," he explained. "They were loud, but, well, who knew brassicas would be so rude?" The rest of the party laughed. "Here's the head's office," said Neville, slightly pink in the face. He knocked on the dark wooden door, then stepped to one side. Harry stepped up as a voice from within called, "Enter, please do." Harry opened the door and stepped inside. Ron gestured to the Muggles and then to his wife to enter before bringing up the rear with Neville. Lydia noticed a brass plaque to one side which read, "Professor de Kelly Lee." The head teacher stood by a large but unassumingly plain desk. She smiled at each of them in turn. She was tall, dark-haired, and wore immaculate robes. She was more handsome, perhaps, than pretty, with dark, intelligent eyes, but a severe jawline. Lydia thought she looked like a high-powered lawyer from a movie. "Welcome, welcome all," she beamed, offering them all chairs. "How can we help you, Auror Potter?" "Harry, please, Professor Lee. We would like to speak with Professor Malfoy about a case we're working on. We think his expertise might be especially useful to us." Harry smiled. "What is the case, may I ask?" the head teacher inquired, speaking in measured tones as she took her seat behind the desk. "It's something unusual, but nothing which would affect Hogwarts," Harry reassured her. "Well, Harry, it appears to be affecting my staff. Perhaps I might be able to help you." "Oh, it's just a few specifics we need from Draco." The head teacher's smile cooled. "I am quite knowledgeable, you understand." "Oh, I'm sure, De Kelly. If Draco can't help or thinks it would be useful to involve you, I'd be happy to take you up on your offer," Harry conceded. "At the moment, however, we're trying to involve as few people as possible." "Few?" The head teacher laughed dryly. "Huh. You seem to have quite an entourage already." "We're under instructions from the minister not to spread it around," Ron interjected. The head teacher leaned back and took a deep breath. She put one hand on the desk and moved a few papers, then looked from Ron to Harry, inclined her head to one side and smiled. Lydia could see no warmth in the smile this time. "Of course, Hogwarts is always happy to help the Aurors and the Ministry. I merely wanted to help as much as I might." Harry's shoulders relaxed and he nodded. "I do appreciate the offer and your hospitality. For now, we would just like to go over some points with Draco. Not a problem. Will you be staying the night at the school? Neville stepped forward. We've arranged for them to stay at the Trained Broomsticks with us. We wanted to come straight here to do you the courtesy of letting you know, Harry began. Thank you, Harry, the teacher smiled. Our facilities are at your disposal, sir. Anything you need, you only have to ask. Thanks, Harry replied. May I introduce the rest of our party? Aura and Advocate Granger Weasley I already know by reputation, and from the textbooks on your Wizarding War too, she admitted. But your non-magical friends, if I'm not mistaken? Harry introduced Lydia and Ambrose, but gave no reason for their involvement other than to say, they have brought something to our attention. And precautions are to be taken, I presume? Professor Lee inquired. Simply thinking of the safety of my school, of course. Everything will be dealt with according to procedure, Harry assured her. They said their farewells to the head teacher and filed out of her office. I believe there was mention of the 3 broomsticks, Ambrose noted. That sounded rather like a visit to some sort of hostelry or public house might be in the offing. Would I be right in thinking so? Yes, Neville confirmed, as they continued walking. It's a pub in Hogsmeade. Hannah, my wife, runs it, and we live there. We have rooms for you all for the night. I was going to ask what you thought about that meeting, said Ron. I know, Ambrose told him quietly. That is why I asked about the 3 broomsticks. I thought it might be best to wait until we are further from our office. Good idea, Harry agreed. Perhaps we should leave it until we are back in Hogsmeade, Hermione hissed before anyone else could say more. Draco won't be able to join us tonight, Neville informed them. He's got some detentions to oversee, then he's going home to Astoria for his supper. Astoria's his wife, he explained to the Muggles. We'll see him in the morning, Harry explained. He has a free period before lunch. So tonight we've got Hannah's cooking, Ron enthused. She's brilliant. Well, Hermione's brilliant too, but Hannah doesn't get sidetracked by every book she sees. Hermione scowled at him. Ron wrinkled his nose back at her. It's a fantastic school, Lydia said, but there doesn't seem to be anyone around. They're all in the Great Hall. It's dinner time, Neville smiled at her. You won't be able to hear yourself think once they all start pouring out. Once they left the castle, they found 2 horseless carriages waiting to take them back down to the village. At least, to Lydia they seemed horseless. Interesting, horses? Ambrose ventured. Did the students not find them a tad unsettling? Lydia looked taken aback. She gazed at her uncle, then at the clearly horseless carriages, and then back at him. The students, most of them, and your niece, I think, can't see them, Neville explained. They're called thestrals. You can only see them if you've seen death. I wasn't sure if Muggles could see them, even then. I can remember when Harry and I were almost the only ones who could see them when we were students. 5th year, wasn't it, Harry? Oh, and Luna, she could see them as well. And Not, added Ron. He could see them too. Right, Neville agreed, nodding. I'd forgotten about him. They described the gaunt, leathery-winged thestrals to Lydia as they climbed into the carriages. Neville, Hermione and Lydia took one carriage, and Ambrose made a point of getting in the other with the 2 auras. So, said Ron, with a frown, what did you think of that meeting? Ambrose? Harry looked at him. Me? As an outsider, Harry clarified. It seemed a smidgen more confrontational than I had expected, Ambrose admitted. I noted that she said she's trying to do the best for her school. Seemed overly defensive, however. Almost hostile. You said you have worked with her before? She seemed oddly formal, if that is the case. I have, Harry said. Ron hasn't, though. What did you think? I thought McGonagall was bad enough, but she did seem touchy. I know she wants to control her school and her staff, but we are auras. I'm glad it's not only me, said Harry. Still, like you say, she's simply looking after her school. She's been so easygoing when I've met her in the past. Too easygoing sometimes. Harry thought for a while. His brow knotted. Maybe she's just having a bad day, Ron ventured. Harry didn't seem convinced. Ambrose nodded unhurriedly, his lips pursed. In the other carriage, Neville and Hermione pointed out the various sights and views on the way, and told Lydia more about the school and the village. Lydia was intrigued with the Whomping Willow, and was eager to meet the giant squid if the opportunity arose. Before long, the carriages pulled into the main street of Hogsmeade. Lydia's head spun around as they passed the shops. She bounced in her seat. By this time it was turning towards dusk, and the shop windows were lit with glowing lights of various colours. A fragrance of food and sweets hung in the air as they passed. "Here we are," Neville announced, and the carriages drew to a halt outside a wide doorway into what was the Three Broomsticks, according to the sign which hung limply in the still air of the gathering gloom. They stepped down from the carriages and into the warm glow of the doorway. Opening the inner doors, they were met with the sounds of chatter and laughter. A burst of warm air carried a heady smell of food and drink. "Hey, everybody," Neville called, and a chorus of greetings came from all across the room. It was busy but not crowded. The atmosphere was happy but not rowdy. A tall blonde woman came towards them from the direction of the bar. She was smiling. As she approached, Lydia heard Harry's name mentioned at least twice in different parts of the room. The lounge was decked with wooden beams and brass curios, as Lydia had expected. It was almost the epitome of a country pub, as she knew them from the television and the occasional visit in the holidays. But here and there on the walls, or above the heads of the clientele who sat at dark wooden tables, were a few unexpected ornamental items. A sleek, highly polished broom was mounted in pride of place on one wall. A long-handled silver axe hung above the bar. Surely that would be illegal. The figures in the pictures dotted around the room were moving, like the pictures they had seen at the Potter's house in London. "Hello, you lot," the blonde beamed as she reached them. "Hi, love," Neville said, kissing her on the cheek. "These three dodgy types you know, and this is Lydia and Ambrose." Hannah greeted them all individually and invited them through into a dining room off the main lounge. A large table was set for dinner, and lamps on the wall gave a warm and intimate light. The chatter from behind the door seemed to redouble as they left the room, but was muted again as the door closed behind them. Snippets of news about family and friends passed between the wizards and witches as they made their way around the table and took their places. A feast of different dishes was delivered to the table by two girls in their late teens, along with jugs of ale, pumpkin juice, and butterbeer. As the meal went on, Harry repeatedly steered the conversation away from the specifics of the case they were investigating. All he would disclose was that Ambrose and Lydia had brought something to their attention, and they needed to get some background information from Draco. Their hosts took the hint and soon stopped asking. Lydia was persuaded by Hannah to try the butterbeer. She took some in the bottom of her glass and sampled it. It tasted rich and felt warming and comforting. Lydia was an instant convert and kept the jug of butterbeer close at hand throughout the rest of the meal. She noticed that her uncle did the same thing with a jug of beer which was completely free of butter. Neville and Hannah were interested in Lydia's experience of her own school, and compared that with their experiences of Hogwarts. Hannah had been to a Muggle primary school, but Neville had been homeschooled. "It sounds like they're getting obsessed with testing in exams," Hannah commiserated. "It seems a bit much for primary school." "Tell me about it," Lydia groaned. "Hogwarts has exams every year," Neville pointed out. "That's different," Hannah protested. "Hogwarts students are older, and it's magic, so they have to be careful. Lydia's just a primary school." Neville wisely conceded this point, but went on to say to his wife, "But you're hoping to do training, and you'll have to take exams again." "What sort of training are you doing, Hannah?" Lydia inquired. "I'd like to be a healer. I've wanted to do it for a while now, and well, I have something to tell everyone later. Just you wait," she winked at Lydia. The main course of the meal was gradually replaced with dessert as, one by one, the dishes of pies and potatoes, casseroles and vegetables were taken away by the two girls, and puddings and sauces were brought out from the kitchens. "Here," said Hannah to Lydia. With a wave of her wand, she cleaned Lydia's plate. Then it curled up at the edges to become a bowl for her dessert course. As they finished their meal, Hannah stood up, holding a glass of butterbeer. "I have an announcement for you all," she said. "I heard today that Tom at the Leaky Cauldron has decided to retire, and he's asked me if I want to take it over. I said yes." There were cheers and applause all round. Neville explained to Lydia and Ambrose that the Leaky Cauldron was a famous wizarding pub in London, and that Hannah had been hoping to take it over for a few years now. "Harry mentioned it," Lydia recalled. "He stayed there before school started, the year they all thought Sirius was going to kill him." "Well remembered," Ambrose congratulated her. "Will you still get to see each other?" Hermione was asking Hannah. "Well, it's funny. Neville only gets Saturday night off most of the time. Saturday will be my busiest night. And I'll be even busier because I'll be close to St. Mungo's Hospital, where I'm going to be training to become a healer." Another round of congratulations and toasting ensued. "I'll come and help whenever I can," Neville promised. "Well, use your wand. You know how clumsy you can be." Hannah rolled her eyes. She winked at Hermione. "He's not nearly as bad as he was, but you've got to keep them on their toes." Hermione giggled. With their meal finished, and having had a long day, they were glad to be led to their rooms. They discovered their luggage was waiting for them. "Oh, I do like that," Ambrose enthused. "It's almost like magic." Lydia and Ambrose had a single room each, and the magical guests had double rooms. Lydia barely had the energy to change into her pyjamas and brush her teeth before she crawled under the covers of her bed and was sound asleep. In the next room, Ambrose stayed awake for quite some time, pottering around the room and looking out of the window before he settled down on the bed to read an old leather-bound book.